Greetings. If I had more guts, I would do this live, but I don't. It's not something, speaking in the public is not something I've done much of, and it's an acquired skill, and I haven't done the work to acquire that skill. So if you're watching this, it's probably not take one. It's probably the second, third, maybe fourth attempt, who knows. But I want to address the issue of Donald Trump. And the reason that I wanted to do it this way was because, while I could write and be more careful about the words that I chose and try to come up with a nuanced perspective, I feel like there is some value in speaking out about this issue and having my facial expressions help you to be able to determine, how strongly I believe or how I just think it's important to be seen as I make this commentary. Donald Trump I was never a fan. I never watched one episode of the show that was the number one show at the time. I didn't watch television at all at that time. And I knew, when I lived in New York City, Donald Trump was a thing, and he would be periodically on the Howard Stern show. And when he was, the people that I worked with, crew members on film sets who were sort of subversive, like they would listen to Howard Stern because he was kind of what the working class in New York liked to listen to, as sort of like in the face of the New York Times liberal elite. Howard Stern was a shock jock, whose content was 75% sexual innuendo. And when Donald Trump was on that show, the few times I ever heard it, which somebody else was playing it while we were either, pre-rigging a lighting setup or tearing down, there was not a chance I was going to be a fan of Donald Trump because he was, involved in the Howard Stern third grade bathroom wall humor. I was never under any illusion that he was a paragon of moral virtue when he announced and ran. And I felt very strongly, and I wrote multiple posts warning people that Donald Trump was selected by the Obama camp because he was the embodiment of the socialist Stalin, of the communist critique of the oppressive white supremacist. Like there it was, the illustration for that point that was driving their personal politics. And I felt like they used the media, that they had almost complete control over in order to force Donald Trump to win the Republican nomination. I watched as the media, he was presidential, and he was, exciting, an outsider, a challenger that, merited all this attention. And he got boatloads of attention. And then he won the nomination, and it flipped on a dime. And I walked through the airports, watched CNN, and saw that flip in real life, in real time, and it was amazing. But I was saying at the time, Donald Trump, he was picked because he was the candidate that they thought Hillary Clinton could beat, that all of her negatives he was not going to be able to counter because, her husband's philandering and her past financial issues and her current, known corruption, that, in a head-to-head competition, Donald Trump was going to be way better for her than Rubio or anybody, than any of the Republican candidates. And then, when he won the nomination, I was So, like, okay, what do you do now? And I was, like most people, I found things that he said, particularly that we should close the border, and that we shouldn't be just throwing our money into the Middle East or into Europe to protect all of the NATO countries who were paying less and doing less for their own protection than we were. And so he said a lot of things that definitely made common sense and registered with me, and I could see why other Republicans and even other non-Republicans, independents and libertarians, were attracted to his candidacy. And also, the more the media tried to make a caricature out of him, I could also see that was sort of backfiring, and it did backfire. He won the election, and it blew their minds. This was never supposed to happen. Now, I do think that when Donald Trump won the election, that he gave all the credit to himself for his genius in campaigning and marketing and brand, and that credit was never deserved. That Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks dumps at the last minute were absolutely a major factor that caused Democrats to not show up for Hillary Clinton and allow Donald Trump to win. And of course, when he won the presidency, I was surprised, like everyone else. But the steps that he took immediately and the things that he did as president, I'm going to say, for me, they were shockingly positive that he was doing those things that he campaigned for. He was working to close the border and to stop illegal immigration. He was working to improve the economy. He definitely went hard after, the Europeans' lack of desire to pay for the protection that we were providing. And he also did take on China and Russia. And people that think he was a Russian stooge, they were just wrong. It's like, if you look at the policies of his presidency toward Russia, I'm not going to spend the time even arguing about it. If you think that Donald Trump was pro-Putin, you're an idiot. It's like you have swallowed the Kool-Aid, and man, was there a lot of Kool-Aid to swallow. And then I watched as the fake, as the deep state went after the sitting president. And never relented. That he had to behave like he was under attack before he accepted the nom, or before he was sworn in, and every day afterwards. And it was unrelenting. And the people who were trying to subvert his presidency and were doing so by controlling the media and lying to the public. And I could see this, and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, now you're stuck defending somebody that you didn't really want to be there in the first place. But then again, there's no question that the policies enacted by the administration, the Trump administration, they did bring unemployment down. They did, he had some people in his administration who were hard at work trying to do exactly what they campaigned, and that was to try to make America great again in every way that they could possibly manage. But he had also surrounded himself with people who were backstabbing, who were part of the elite globalist, management class, who hated him. They hated his, he was not part of that crowd, and they hated him, and they hated him for winning, and they hated the fact that the public liked him. They hated his populism. They hated him. And they were not about to sit on their hands. They spent every moment, every working day was, let's find a way to take Trump out. and his administration had to operate under those conditions. And I became conditionally a Trump fan based on the results of the policies that his administration had implemented, and you couldn't argue with it. You couldn't argue with it. Unemployment for minorities was at an all-time low. So for being a racist, he was a horrible racist because he was doing things for minority communities that no racist would ever dream of. It's like that's total failure in terms of being racist. And you could say that his tax policies favored the wealthy and probably favored the people who were trying to take him out. And it was his it was his ego. I assume everybody, watched it in real time like I did. So I'm not going to go through all of that except to say that when the election came back around the second time, I voted for Donald Trump. I didn't vote, anti whoever. And I certainly had no desire to see Joe Biden become the president of the United States. So that was it was high motivation to vote for Trump. But I wanted a continuation of his administration. However, and this is the part this is why I'm doing this video. And it's like, Donald Trump got rolled. When the pandemic happened, that the first thing he did was deny to the public the problem, saying, oh, it wasn't that big a deal. And then when when the people who were telling him, oh yes it is, it's this is real, then he jumped in and supported these people with all the power and authority of the executive office. And that was a huge mistake, because all he did was give them the noose and the rope to hang him. And so here's the thing. It's like, Donald Trump's running. People are excited about it. They see him, also, the Biden administration is it's a disaster. This is the worst administration of my lifetime. It is the worst administration imaginable. It's like I can't even think of first of all, I don't believe Biden won. I do believe the election was rigged on a number of fronts, and I do think that so I don't think Biden ever really was. I don't think he got the most votes in the history of the country, period. I do think the election was rigged and it was stolen from Donald Trump. But I also think that Donald Trump, he poured gas into the tank of the machine that ran over him. And here's the point. He never has fully acknowledged or admitted it. If Donald Trump were to step up and say, America, when I listened to Fauci, when I listened to the experts who told me that I needed to lock down the country and that we need to implement the PrEP Act in order to further protect the pharmaceutical companies from the harms they were about to inflict. And when I pushed the Operation Warp Speed and then took credit for it, I made a horrific mistake, and I apologize. I see that now and I recognize it, and I am so sorry. I wish that I had better advice. I wish that I had taken the advice that argued against it. I wish that I had done things differently, and I know now not to trust I know now to take a second hard look at the advice that I'm getting and try to figure out where it stems from, and to follow the money and to follow who's behind and who's pushing it, and basically to recognize that there is a globalist elite class, and that they and the management globalist unelected class that has run Washington D.C. for decades, that I need to be far more aware of how that works in the future. And if you will give me a second chance, then I will go at it to the best of my abilities. But the one thing that Donald Trump hasn't done that bothers me is ever admit the mistake that he made. That when he was all in for the PrEP Act, which I think it was unanimous. Oh my gosh. And when they did, and he sat on his hands, or he was all for the emergency use authorization. And then he was all into Operation Warp Speed. And, he was full of himself in the idea that he was going to have a big impact on heading off and stopping the pandemic and getting the country back on its feet. He fully underestimated what was going on. He fully underestimated who was involved, and he still has not acknowledged the mistakes that he made and the gravity of those mistakes. And if he would step up and say, man, I screwed up. I made the wrong decision. I should have never locked down. I should have never listened to these people. I should have paid much closer attention to who Dr. Fauci was and what his history was, and who he actually is embedded with and entangled with. And I should have understood, what's the WEF's role in the pandemic and the WHO's role and China's role. I should have been far more interested in ironing out and figuring out where all of those things were before I ever just ran and started trying to make these populist decisions that I had some fantasy was going to turn me into the heroic solution to this pandemic. As it is, here he is now being screwed once again, railroaded by people who I believe, cheated and kept him from becoming they didn't keep him from being reelected. They kept him from regaining the office. And they're also not about to sit by and allow him to take it now. Here's the thing. If Donald Trump if he would step up and say, America, I messed up. I apologize. And if you give me a second chance, I will try to the best of my ability not to make those same mistakes. But if he doesn't acknowledge that, if he still brags about Operation Warp Speed, then he still has a problem that makes him highly vulnerable. That even if he were to win the office, that his inability to recognize when he is being manipulated and when he is being massaged and when he is being used makes him vulnerable to doing this or something even worse again. So there it is. It's my plea to the Trump campaign people, to Trump and his followers and his administration, I guess not administration, but his campaign staff, and that is, hey, step up and acknowledge that you were responsible for shutting the country down, and that was a mistake, that it was a bad decision with horrible consequences, including putting you in the position that you're in now. And that you're committed to not making that same mistake because you fully understand what it is you did and what the results of that are. And if that were to happen, then yeah, I'd go put a Trump sign on my front yard and put 2 banners on my car. I'd have a sticker on the front, back, and both sides. But until he does that, then my support for Donald Trump is conditional. And it's conditional in this regard. Biden must go. The Biden administration must go. These people, they don't just, I don't even know, spend the time, I'm not going to spend the time to talk about the multitude of things and ways in which the Biden administration is a disaster. It's a disaster from, I can drive from, 5 miles from my house and see the results of Biden economics. Any grocery store that I walk into, any gas station that I go to, and also anybody that I talk to, the results of the poor and almost antithetical to the United States decisions of this administration are obvious. And then, the additional problems of watching our judicial system just get smoked. And, and knowing that the direction that we're headed cannot be sustained. We are definitely on a course for the cliff if we haven't already gone over. So yeah, my support for Trump is there because of the administration of Biden, which is, it's not, Biden's not running the show. It's whoever these people are that have their hand up his backside that have put him in office and keep him in office. They absolutely must go. And so in that regard, if Trump wins the nomination, then again, I will support Trump as the only other choice to the horrible choice on the ballot. But if he wants my full support, then what he needs to do is to acknowledge that the Operation Warp Speed, that the lockdowns, the shut-ins, that the decisions that he made and the advice he took and the people he listened to, that was a monumental mistake that he needs to own up to and admit. And if he does, then I would be so much more inclined to support him. And if he doesn't, then my support will be conditional. There you go.